It is a good day to be in the house of the Lord. Are you excited to be with the people of God today? Every location joining us, everybody joining us online. Listen, if you're new to Vox, we are one family of faith, one church. We meet in a number of locations across Connecticut and Massachusetts, and of course, people joining us live online as well. So New Haven, can we just put our hands together and say good morning to our Middletown, Hartford, every location. Good morning, we love you. Welcome to church. We're so glad you're a part of our services today. If you're in the balcony, we love you especially. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, we love you up there. One person, I can't really see you with the lights, but I'm sure things are good. Listen, so thankful for what the Lord is doing in our midst right now. When you walked in at every one of our locations, you received a welcome pack with a lot of little pieces of paper in it, but I want to just highlight a couple of them for you today. See if you can find this one, all right? This one, it says 10 years at Vox. If you haven't heard the news, we've got coming up on September 12th, the biggest celebration we have ever done as a church at the Westville Music Bowl. One service, 10:30 a.m. outside, September 12th. Every single campus coming together for our 10-year anniversary. It's going to be great for our 10-year anniversary. And I really want to challenge you. This is an incredible time to invite a family member, invite a friend, invite a coworker to come to church. They've probably never been to church in an outdoor arena before. And I really believe that this is an opportunity just to be able to show the love of Christ to somebody in your life. And so I'm using this card personally for 5 people in my life. I just want to encourage you, use this card in your life. What does that mean? What it means is you take a few moments, you can do it right now with the pen in your hand, and write down the name of 5 people that are in your life who maybe need a touch from God right now. Maybe they're not a part of church. Maybe they kind of have drifted during this crazy last year and a half that we've had. And so I just want to encourage you, write their names down and then put this somewhere that you're going to see it. And start praying for them every day, just asking, God, would you open their heart? Would you give them a desire to know more about you, Jesus? And then stretch out and invite them to September 12th. Meet them there, sit with them, and have a time of celebration where we worship Jesus and honor all that he's done. It's going to be an incredibly special day, but I really believe that many of us, your family member, your friend, your coworker, they're going to meet Jesus that day. Come on, somebody say amen. They're going to meet Jesus that day, and it's going to be a powerful time in their life. And so I just encourage you, take some time, pray every day for 5 people, and then invite them to come with you. It is going to be a time of miracles. I really believe that, a time of miracles. Second thing I want to tell you about, and then we're going to jump into part 4 of this teaching series, The Fire Remains, talking about how to burn bright without burning out, right? How to live a life that's sustainable for the long haul. And we'll have this sermon today about that, and then next week we'll wrap up this series. But today you're going to be hearing in just a minute from Mike SCHNEPP, who has just got an incredible word. I am so encouraged by the word that he's going to share with you today. So prepare your hearts. But I want you to find this card now. The second card. I know that we gave you a lot of paper today, forgive us, but this second card, it says, I'm ready to host a community group. And I just want to talk about this for a moment. If you've been with Vox any length of time, you know that the fall is a really important time for us this next couple of months. And on September 26th, after our big 10-year celebration, we're starting an 8-week teaching series called Bury Your Ordinary. We're going to be talking about 7 habits that will cause incredible spiritual growth in your life. And I am convinced that these 8 weeks are going to be some of the most transformative weeks of your life. That maybe you're here and you're like, I feel a little stuck spiritually. I feel a little like I need a jolt. I need to focus again. This last year and a half has kind of spun me around. I'm telling you, these 8 weeks are really going to be life-changing. But in order to experience the full impact of this fall series that we're going to be doing, it's so important that we join some community groups. And so if you're here and maybe you've been coming to Vox every week or joining us online every week, September 26th is your time to start being a part of a midweek small group that meets in somebody's house, that really starts to engage the materials that we're looking at on a more, consistent, deeper level. And so in our lobby at every one of our locations or at the table in the back, you've got these really, aren't these snazzy looking boxes? these very nice looking boxes. And who are these for? Let me explain it just for a moment, okay? For everybody that's not in a group, today you can sign up to be in a small group, all right? You'll be able to have an opportunity to sign up next week and the week after as well. But we want to encourage you, if at all possible, sign up today to be in a small group. But there might be a few of us here that you're actually interested in hosting a group at your house. You'd say, you know what? I could have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 people come over my house and we could do this material together. That might sound super intimidating to you. I promise we make it so easy, all right? There's an introductory video. There are questions outlined for the host to lead through. It doesn't take a PhD in theology. All it takes is an open heart. That's all it takes, okay? And so if you're interested in hosting a group, go to the table at the back of your location today and ask for one of these boxes. They'll sign you up. They'll give you this box. Inside the box has everything you need to be able to host a small group starting on the week of September 26th, all right? So before I get out of the way, I need you to turn to the person next to you and tell them you need to join a group. Come on, just tell them you need to join a group. You need to join a group. Can we just put our hands together and welcome Pastor Mike as he comes to share?
All right, church, we don't do this often enough. Can we just honor our lead pastor, just say thank you to him for leading us? Come on, take a second and do that. It's good, it's good, it's good. Welcome to church. So glad to have you. If I haven't had the opportunity to meet you, my name is Mike SCHNEPP. Get the great honor of serving as the executive pastor here at Vox Church, and so excited for what God is doing among us. As Justin mentioned, we've been in this sermon series called The Fire Remains, How to Burn Bright Without Burning Out. What an incredibly important concept, topic for us to be wrestling through as we ask that question. In a world that is ever increasingly fast-paced, how do you burn bright without burning out? So I'm glad you're here. Welcome to Vox Church. God is doing a lot. There is an enormous amount of things for you to plug into, get involved with, and so I hope that you'll do that. If this is your first time, a special welcome to you. Welcome to Vox Church. So glad you're here. We have been studying a great leader, the life of Moses, as we've been in the sermon series called The Fire Remains. We're going to pick it up again today, the book of Exodus. So if you got your Bibles with me, turn to chapter 18, where we will pick it up in verse 13. It says this. It says, the next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, what is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone? And all the people stand around you from morning to evening. And Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God when they have a dispute. They come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known to them the statutes of God and his laws. Moses' father-in-law said to him, what you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. Now obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them known the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide among themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. Part 4 of The Fire Remains is called Where less means more. Where less means more. Let's bow our heads together and let's pray. So God in heaven, we come before you right now. We thank you for the power of your word. We thank you for your Holy Spirit applying it to our hearts right now. God, I thank you that every single time we open your word, we have the ability to leave changed. And so we ask for that right now. God, I pray that you would take this and apply it directly to each and every single heart. We invite you, Holy Spirit. In your name we pray. Amen. 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 You have probably heard the name Roger Bannister. He was famous for, in 1954, becoming the very first person to break the 4-minute mile as a runner. You may be less familiar with the name Eliud Kipchoge. Eliud Kipchoge is the modern-day version of Roger Bannister. For years now, scientists have been debating and wrestling, is it possible for a human being to run a marathon underneath 2 hours? That's 26.2 miles at a mile pace of 4 hours and 35 seconds. I mean, 4 minutes and 35 seconds. I mean, many of us could not even do a single mile like that. And he set out to become the very first person to run a marathon in under 2 hours. In October of 2019, after a bunch of fanfare, they made a documentary about it. It was kind of a big deal. He broke it. And I was actually watching the live stream of it, and I was struck, yes, by the achievement, but also every single place that you could see, on his shirt, on his social media, on the screen, signs everywhere, was his slogan: "No human is limited." No human is limited. Everywhere, the inspiring message, no human is limited. And on the surface, you hear something like that and you say, yes, no human is limited. It actually seems to awaken some sort of inspiration inside of us. And there's something in us that says, the world lies before me, and I can achieve any dream that I want if I'm willing to sacrifice enough or dare greatly enough. We hear these incredible stories of entrepreneurs who built something like Amazon out of their garage, and we think, I could totally do that. Limits are meant to be broken. They stand in the way of my dreams. When I was growing up, I was in second grade when I joined the Michael Jordan fan club. I saved up $17 to join the Michael Jordan fan club, and I had dreams of joining the NBA one day. Spent a lot of time going to basketball camps, spent a lot of time playing on a lot of different teams, and the problem for me was when I had about 15, I was as tall as I was right now, and I didn't grow any taller. So I get to senior year of college, and they're like, my man, you can play a little bit, but you're a little short. You're a little short for that next level. I could jump and just barely clear a credit card, and I realized that my height had become a limit to my dreams. Somewhere along the way, we began believing that limits are actually bad for us. But what I want to say to you today is that limits are not inherently bad. That actually, inside all of creation, God has designed limits to be lived within if you are going to experience the fullness of the life that He has for you. You walk in today, you may not even realize it. You have limits based on your age, based on your income, based on your season of life. You have more or less time, depending on if you're married or if you have young kids at home. There's all sorts of limits a part of your life. See, the problem is for so many of us, though, we like to live as though they aren't there, like they aren't true, and so we blow past the limits of time. Many of us here can attest to what it feels like to have a calendar that's a little too full, to have lives that are a little bit stretched too thin, to be feeling like I'm a rubber band getting stretched where everything and every relationship in my life is a mile wide, but it's only an inch deep because I only have so much time to give to so many things. We live day by day stressed, anxious, frazzled, moving from one thing to another, not feeling like I've got really time to invest in anything meaningful at all. Some of us, we ignore the financial limits of our stage of life, and we have a certain amount of income, but we're not going to live by that budget because I want something now and the instant gratification, and so we rack up the credit card debt and we go into various types of debt, only to realize that by not living by the limits of our stage of life, that debt becomes a shackle that keeps us from the very dreams that we set out to achieve. Let's get real. Some of us are unwilling to live within the limits that a healthy marriage requires in terms of relationships. And we're on the verge and the precipice of making some decisions that will wreck the lives of people we love because we're not willing to live inside those limits. How do you burn bright without burning out? See, somewhere along the way, we stopped believing that God actually had our best in mind. We either don't believe it or we just don't care. And we believe that these limits that we see all throughout Scripture, that God has hardwired into the creative order, limits on you, limits on me, limits that drive our holiness, our decisions, limits that drive how much we can take on, and all the various things. We came to believe that instead of God being out for our good, He's actually trying to keep good from us. And so rather than submitting to those things, rather than embracing the limits that God has hardwired and written about in Scripture, we blast through them only to realize that He actually had our good in mind all along, and if we had actually chosen to live by them, our lives would have flourished. Limits. Limits. It's not an incredibly fun topic for many of us to think about. There's something in us that just wants to push back against them. But I honestly believe this idea of the fire remains, of burning bright without burning out, if we do not understand the limits that God has put on us and we refuse to live within them, we will never experience that abundant life of peace and joy that God promises and that Jesus shares in John chapter 10. See, what I want you to understand today is that in all of our lives, there's a lot of different ways that this plays out. And I can't tell you exactly how it's working out for you. You know the areas that are causing friction. You know the areas that are causing you anxiety. You know the areas that are causing you to live worried about tomorrow, fearful, or the relationships that are a little bit broken because of the choices you're making, or the relationships that aren't getting the investment because you're spending time in other places. You know what that is, and I believe that God wants to highlight for you and pinpoint for you today some very practical changes that He would like you to make. Because what I want to try and show you in just a couple of minutes is that God has not created order and limits for your removal of fun, for your removal of joy, but actually in order to see those things maximized, to see your joy and your peace and the abundant life He promises actually flourish. G.K. Chesterton is a famous theologian who writes about this idea, and he says this. He says, "The more I considered Christianity, the more I found that while it had established a rule and order, the chief aim of that order was to give room for good things to run wild." God's not trying to hold you back. I come to you this morning as a fellow pilgrim on the journey. As I've been thinking about this and reflecting on this in the last week or two, it's not news to me, but I know I've got a propensity to fill up my calendar a little bit too much. I typically tend to take on a little bit more I can manage and then feel the stress and the anxiety and all of that beginning to come out. And I was thinking about a time I was sharing with a friend not too long ago, my senior year of high school, where it was winter time, and so I was beginning to think about college and applications were due, and to get ahead, I was taking some classes at the local community college, and I was working 20 hours a week to pay for car insurance to get to the job, and I was playing on the varsity basketball team, also playing on 3 different indoor soccer teams, and I found myself completely worn thin. And you'd think I would have learned. When I told my wife that I was preaching about this, she goes, "Great, you should preach that to yourself first." Touche, Mrs. Schnepp, touche. See, I think most of us here would know what it's like to feel a little bit overburdened and stressed out and anxious because we just keep expanding our lives to the degree that become untenable. And what God wants you to see this morning is that He has designed limits around your life, and if you will live inside them, you will actually experience the things you dream. It's not by going past those limits that you get to experience that. It's by submitting to Him, saying yes, and then living a life according to that order and according to that purpose. And you might think that as you hear this, that this is a bit of a modern phenomenon. But honestly, this idea of limits is all throughout Scripture. And as we meet Moses here in chapter 18, we see he has completely blown through the limits of time and physical and emotional energy. Because what's happening here is he's leading the people of Israel. And they are 2 to 3 million people right now. 2 to 3 million people, like Connecticut. And he is the only person presiding over disputes between 2 and 3 million people. I mean, imagine this. "Moses, that guy killed my goat." "Okay, take care of it next one." "Moses, he stole my shirt." "Moses, I lent her money and she didn't give it back." I mean, for 2 to 3 million people. And it says that there was people standing all day long just waiting for Moses to preside. And Jethro comes, who's his father-in-law, and he goes, "My man, what are you doing? What are you doing?" He's in this untenable situation, and he doesn't seem to even know that it's broken, that he and other people are suffering as a result of it. I was reading this week, the reason that Jethro is here in chapter 18 is because he was bringing Moses' family back to him. Moses, because of his responsibilities in leading the people of Israel, had actually sent his family off to his in-laws because he didn't have time for them. And I just thought, isn't it so true that the people closest to us often bear the worst effects of our lack of limits? That when our lives begin to get out of sort, or we begin to make choices that don't align with what God has for us, it's actually those closest to us that feel the effects. And so Moses' family, on the outside, we think, boy, what a noble thing he's doing. He's leading the people of Israel. God is using him. But his wife is waking up every day without a husband, and his kids are growing up without a dad. Why? Because breaking limits in this way, they never just affect us. There are always cascading ripple effects, and we've got to understand this, that sometimes we think, well, it only affects me. Nonsense! Over the last year and a half, I know many of us have experienced what it has felt like to be pushed to the very limit and beyond in terms of the amount of stress we can carry, the amount of anxiety we've had. This has been an incredibly difficult last 18 months, and I know for me personally that there have been probably dozens of times where I have felt myself just overstretched, just too much going on, unable to carry everything in a way that's healthy. And there have been days, if I'm really honest, that though I wasn't physically absent like Moses was, I can tell you about some days that I was emotionally absent. I can think of some days where I'd get home from work and we'd have dinner, and instead of investing some quality time in my kids, my wife and I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, I'd say, who wants to watch a documentary or Animal Planet or something like that? And my kids are like, oh, Dad, you're the best. The truth is, I just don't have anything to give them. So I'm putting on the TV because I'm too far stretched. I don't have anything else in the tank. And I see that, and I think back on that, and I think, God has better for me and better for my kids than that. In church, I think the same is true for you. I think pretty much every single person in the room knows what it's like to be stretched a little bit too thin. And there are probably some of you here who are like, nah, man, I've never been stressed in my life. I Sabbath 4 days a week. You got to get in the game then, okay? Because I think most people know what it's like to be a little bit too busy and a little bit too stretched. And I just want to say, church, what if we refuse to accept that? What if we refuse to say, that's good enough for me? I just imagine, what would our lives be like? I think, the experience of my girls growing up would be better if I lived more within God's limits. And I think the same is true for those in your life as well. You see, so Moses has got this kind of untenable situation going on. Life is insane and kind of crazy, and Jethro does show up, and he goes, Mo, my man, what you are doing is not good. Not good. And I was thinking about this week, how many of us have a Jethro in our life who could say this to us? We're talking about community groups, we're talking about investing in community, and I so love how Jethro is able to see it because he's close to it, and then has the courage to speak it into Moses' life. Who in your life right now would look at what is going on and say, hey, I love you too much not to tell you that that's not good? As you take stock and you take inventory of the people in your life, if you don't have a Jethro right now, don't wait any longer. It's a reason that we are so passionate about community groups, about core groups, because God has interwoven our lives with one another so that we are the people who can come alongside others when they're struggling and go, man, this is not good. Let me help you with a plan, just like Jethro did. And so if you're not in community, if you're not in a community group, this is a tangent, sign up. Begin to take those first steps into community so that you can develop a Jethro in your life as well. So Jethro comes and he pushes Moses on this. My man, not good. It's not holy. It's not noble. This is actually not good. And what does Moses say? It says, and Moses said to his father-in-law, because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another. And I make them know the statutes of God and his laws. See, Moses gives us a peek into how he got here. There's a thrill of being needed. There's a thrill of feeling important. And wherever you are today, you've got to ask yourself the question, in this area of life that is beginning to be a little bit too much or stretched or whatever, why did I get here? Because if you don't know how you find yourself in situations like this, you don't know how to apply the gospel to it and allow yourself to be healed. I've got a friend who works 80 or 90 hours a week, incredibly successful, never goes on vacation. I asked him the other day. I was like, my man, how come you never take your wife away on vacation? He said, honestly, I'm afraid that if I leave the office for a week, they're going to realize they don't need me, and I'm going to be out of a job. What is that speaking? It's fear. He had allowed his work-life balance to get out of sync because he was afraid that God wouldn't take care of him. Maybe you're here and your calendar is so full because you say yes to everything people ask you to do. Every time they ask you to come over, every serving opportunity, you say yes to every single one of them. And on the outside, it looks like you're being a kind person, but on the inside, you just can't stand disappointing people because their approval means more to you than the approval God has given you as a son or a daughter of God. See, if we're going to begin to develop a new life that lives within these parameters God sets, we got to understand the thing in us that pushes us away from that so then we can invite Jesus into that. How do we respond when God pushes on us? Really reveals the core of our relationship with Him. For so many of us, fear is dominating us, or the approval stuff I just talked about, or the need to achieve so that I can be somebody. And I wonder how many times God is just looking at us going, if you would just believe me, if you would just receive what I have told you, I'm telling you, it would be better. And every parent knows the frustration of this, right? I remember a couple of years ago, we were telling my then maybe 5-year-old, like, hey, no scissors, all right? No playing with the scissors, all right? You're going to cut yourself, whatever. Well, did she listen? No. So one morning, we go up to the bathroom, and we found she'd given herself a haircut. It looked like she got in an attack with a weed whacker, right? And so it's like your hair's kind of like, it's like, why don't you just listen to me? Now I got school pictures, and you look like you look a little crazy. And I wonder how many times God says the same thing to us where He's like, my man, will you just listen to me? I have your good in mind. I'm like, Taylor, I set the limits with the scissors for your good. Just listen to Daddy so you don't have to go to school looking crazy. And how many times is God saying the exact same thing to us? Will you just trust me? Stop going around what I've said. Stop going past what I've asked you to do. Don't you know that, man, I'm for your good. You know, there's something that seems to be hardwired into the DNA of humans. It goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. You remember Adam and Eve, they're in the garden. They're enjoying the presence of God every day. They're enjoying fruitful work and relationship. And God then says to them, hey, here's one tree that I don't want you to eat the fruit from. God doesn't really give them a reason. He just says, hey, this tree is off limits, okay? I want you to trust me. I want you to believe that I have your good in mind. Look around. You can see that I'm good. Leave that tree alone. And yet, that thing in us that doesn't like to be held back, that doesn't like to be pushed against, led them to get to a place where they said, you know what? Of all the fruit we have here, I think we're going to go eat of that one tree God told us not to. Because there's something inside our hearts that wants to be unlimited, that as limited people doesn't like being limited. Rather than trusting God in that moment, what do? They give in to the temptation so that they can know good and evil, so that they can be like God, and they break and sever the relationship with God that they had. And creation has felt the same effects of that ever since. And there's something that's just wired itself into our hearts to do the exact same thing. God has spent thousands of years and written it inside the Bible in this incredibly beautiful story of love known as the Scriptures, in which He proves in 100 different ways, I love you. Will you trust me? Even here in Adam and Eve's mistake. In Genesis chapter 3, God begins to promise that though you have made these mistakes, I will come one day and undo them. And He promises His Son. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus comes, the unlimited one, who bows to the limits of God in order that you and I could experience freedom and wholeness and choose again to trust and submit to Him. Jesus, the unlimited Son of God in the garden, says, God, not my will, but yours be done. When Jesus is being arrested and Peter lops off some guy's ear, he says, don't you know I could call 12 legions of angels right now? Peter, I am submitting to the limits of God because He's good. The Scriptures will be fulfilled. And I wonder how many of us have gotten to a place where we actually believe that God has our best in mind. that he actually is good. He's out for our good. That he's moving in incredible ways. And if we will just align ourselves with these various things, that we'll actually see the goodness of God. I wonder, church, you think of the places of your life that are just out of sync and out of whack. Begin to ask yourself, what would it look like if I got my finances in order? What would it look like if I said no to a couple of those relationships and began to just focus on the most important ones? What would it look like if I began to stop flirting with that coworker at work and my marriage could really flourish? What would it look like if I took my calendar back and invested in the most important things? What would it actually look like if we took God at his word and said, okay, I'm going to choose to submit to you? What would it look like? Well, Jethro tells us. I love this. Listen to this and receive this for yourself. If you do this, I believe God is saying the exact same thing to you right now. Jethro to Moses represents what God is saying to us. If you do this, listen to this. God will direct you. You will be able to endure. And all this people also will go to their place in peace. See, God wants to flip on its head the idea that limits are meant to hold us back, and instead, they're one of God's main graces and gifts for our good. And so the three gifts that they give us are right here. The first thing he says is this: God will direct you. If you can't remember the last time you felt you got direction clearly from God, it's probably because you're not carving out the time to sit and be quiet. See, I find the first thing to go when I get a little too crazy and a little too stressed and a little too busy is my real time where I just sit with God and receive, where I hear from him. You know, the wisdom that we need to move through this life is promised in James 1:5. It says, if anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask, and God will give it to him generously. If we're not asking because we're too busy, then we are not receiving divine wisdom daily. Mother Teresa is famous for saying this: in the silence, God speaks. Silence takes time. Silence takes work. When you're sitting alone, quiet with God in the morning, it means you're not doing something else. What would it look like to begin to experience the direction daily from God? You know, we get a really beautiful picture of this in Mark chapter 1, where Jesus has been really involved in ministry. It says the night before what I'm going to read to you, Jesus was healing and all this really beautiful ministry. And then it says this in Mark chapter 1, in verse 35, about the very next day. It says, and rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place. And there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And they found him and said to him, everyone is looking for you. And he said to them, let us go on to the next towns, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out. And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons. See, because Jesus had lived submitted to the Father, he had carved out time to be with God that day, and the voice of everyone was quieted. See, so many of us, we're living according to the voice of everyone. We are playing defense with our calendar and our time and our spending and all of those things, rather than saying, listen, I know what God has called me to do, and so I'm stepping forward in it. And so when Jesus hears everyone is looking for you, the voice of everyone gets quiet because the voice of God had made it clear you're not to go on to the next town. See, that's what it means to live directed by God. And so I just wonder, if you're not experiencing what it means to be led by God every day, you might just be missing out. See, the first gift that living within God's limit gives us is clarity. God directs my steps. Clarity. God directs my steps. But that's not it. Second thing Jethro says is this. He says, you will be able to endure. Church, there's something inside me that when people ask, like, what do you want to be known for? There's this thing in me that says, I want to be faithful to the end. We live in a season where we're watching church leaders or just friends or people who are faithful to serve and love God and love their families for a season, and then after a decade or two, they blow it up and their life is never the same. And there's something in me that looks at that and says, God, not with me. God, I don't want to get to the end of my life and have half of it have been living in the reality of some mistakes that I couldn't come back from. What would it look like for you and I to get to the end of our life and have done this Christian walk faithfully, year after year after year. The cadence, the pace, the rhythm to do this over the long haul. You know, I mentioned last time I spoke, my friend Carol, who's been a part of our Bridgeport campus and has really spent her life discipling women and investing in the kingdom and praying for our church. And she did lose her battle to cancer this week. And we have her calling hours today and her funeral tomorrow. And I don't know, as I've been thinking about this, if I've ever met someone who was so faithful to the end like I've watched her. Everything out of her mouth is glorifying God and praising Jesus, and now she's in His presence. Faithful to the end. Don't you want that? Don't you want that for yourself, for your family? This ability to endure. I tell you, listen, it's like a stretched rubber band. It can only stay stretched for so long until it's permanently damaged. If you're going to get to the end faithful, you've got to figure out that pace of life that God has called you to so that you can endure. It's the second thing He tells us. The second gift, I'm going to call it this: longevity. A life that goes the distance. A life that goes the distance. Is something in you just awakened to that idea? Man, I want to be faithful for decades and decades until I see Jesus face to face. And if being directed by God and living a life that was faithful to the end wasn't enough, there's actually a third thing that limits allow us to do. It says this. It says, and all this people also will go to their place in peace. That word peace there is the Hebrew word for shalom, which many of you perhaps have heard. It really means more than just peace. It means wholeness. It means completeness. It means a rhythm of beauty and rest. And what they're saying here is that Moses, if you'll do this, not only will you benefit, you'll hear from God, you'll endure to the end, everyone in your sphere of influence will be blessed as well. See, what Moses began to understand here is that, boy, by pulling back on some of these things, I was able to actually maximize what God had called me to. That by simplifying my life, I was able to accomplish more. And so what we've got to see is that God has put inside each and every one of us a sphere of influence. Aunts, uncles, coworkers, friends. What would it be like if every person who came in contact with us experienced shalom? Experience what it's like to be in contact with someone who walks with the Holy Spirit, who brings the kingdom of God into their life in every conversation. That's what limits allow you to do. Don't you want to be that type of person? You can bring strain or you can bring shalom. Which is it going to be for you? Because when we get to the end of our lives, it's not our accomplishments that God will be talking about with us. It's not going to be the businesses we started. It's not going to be all the various things that we fill our life up with. He's going to say, how well did you love me? And how well did you love others? How often did you bring shalom into the lives of those? And I guarantee that if we'll make that investment, boy, we will never regret that. So many of our relationships, I really believe, are being starved to death by velocity because we're moving at such a pace that we can't love the way Jesus would have us love. What do limits do? They give us space to love well. Limits give us space to love well. That's a third gift. We're going to say this. It gives us legacy, a life of lasting influence. Legacy, a life of lasting influence. I just want you to get a picture of that right now. What would it look like if you took this today and began to adopt some changes? Began to put things back inside the box that God has called you to. What a beautiful picture that is, to live directed by God, to be faithful to the end, and all along the way to be a source of blessing to everyone God brings into contact with you. Church, I believe that as we do this individually and as a church family, we learn to do this, that everyone around us will see it and notice. You see, in order for us to see the dreams come true that we have as a church community, to see New England reach with the gospel, it's going to take time. This is not a 1-year plan or a 10-year plan. This is a rest of the lifetime plan. And so if we're going to do that, if we're going to be faithful to the end, if we're going to love well, we've got to learn to live inside the limits that God has set for us, because I believe this, that embracing God's limits creates a life of lasting impact. And if a church can do this, then it creates a church of lasting impact as well. Would you stand with me? Moses comes to the very same place that you are today, faced with a decision to make. Faced with the reality of a life that is getting away from him, with decisions that have left him and others hurting, the decision that's left his family absent from him, and he gets to a point where he's got to make a choice. The very same place you are right now, God has been pinpointing and highlighting certain things in your life and in your heart that he wants you to make some adjustments to. And you stand at the same precipice that Moses did that day, saying, "What do I do?" And it says this. In verse 24 and 25, "So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. Moses chose able men out of all of Israel and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens." Two words in that verse just stuck out to me so much. Moses chose. Moses chose. If you're here about 10 weeks ago, one of our board members, Lance Witt, spoke, and he said something that has just lodged inside my head. You are ridiculously responsible for your own soul. It's not your boss's job to manage your calendar. It's not your wife's job to manage the budget. You are responsibly in control, responsible. You are ridiculously responsible for your own soul. You have the same choice Moses had. Will you say yes? Will you humble yourself and submit yourself to the plan of God, whether it makes sense to you or not? Would you humble yourself and submit yourself to the limits God has put on your life and your season, even when it doesn't make sense? Would you humble and submit yourself to the limits he's put on relationships, even when it doesn't make sense? Will you humble and submit? Because there is where true freedom is found. I want to give you a little piece of homework. In your time with God this week, which you're going to have because you're making some changes to your calendar, right, church? You're going to sit with God, and I just want you to ask 3 questions. Very honest questions between you and your pen and the paper that you're writing on. God, what areas of my life are overextended right now? You probably don't have to think very hard about that. They probably came to mind pretty quickly when you went, "Oh, shoot, he's talking about limits." What areas of my life are overextended? Second question, why have I let them get that way? Why have I allowed this to happen? It's an important question, like we said a couple minutes ago, because in that, as God reveals that to you, maybe for you it's a need for approval. Maybe for you it's a need for achievement. Maybe for you it's that you don't trust God. It's 1,000 different things. In that moment, you invite him into it. You apply the gospel to your heart in that moment right there. You receive sonship, daughtership. You receive trust. You receive promises like Matthew 6:33 that says, "I will take care of everything in your life. Seek me first." That's the promise of Matthew 6:33. Fear bows at that promise, doesn't it? Where you find yourself just bowing to the approval of others. I don't want to disappoint people, so I say yes to everything. God says, you already have full approval in me. Don't you understand? You don't need to find it in others. When you go looking for it elsewhere, it messes everything up. And you apply the gospel. And then the third thing, ask him for a vision. What would my life look like if I made these changes? I tell you, church, God spoke this so clearly to me this week as I began to see, just very clearly laid out, what are those 3 gifts? Man, I so badly want, don't you, to hear the voice of God every single day. I want to know what it's like to be led by my Savior who knows me and loves me. I want to get to the end of my life and I want to have done this well. Don't you? Don't you want to get to the end of your life and say, I've done this well? And then lastly, man, I want to be a source of grace, a conduit, a delivery system of grace to every single person in my life. Don't you want that? That's the invitation from God to you this morning. Will you choose? Will you say yes? Let's pray. God, we confess there's that thing in us that just pushes against us. It just says, I'm not sure if I want to do that. I think I know better. I'm not sure God's good. I don't know all these things. God, we just, for a second, we just push those things aside. And we just say, God, we will step out in faith and say, I trust you. And God, I thank you that it's not blind trust. I thank you that you've shown us in so many different ways that you are good and faithful and merciful and kind, and you love us and know us better than we love or know ourselves. And so, God, we just say yes. We say yes to you. God, we do humble ourselves. We submit ourselves to your plan. God, we invite you into the practical things that these types of prayers offer. And we thank you for the confidence burned into our hearts because of what Christ has done on the cross, that you are good and you can be trusted. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. Amen, God. Let's sing it back to God.